Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mindset RX series of the Alpha Movement podcast. My name is Tom Foxley and I work with functional athletes to build them the champ's mindset. And these podcasts highlight methods that I teach the athletes I work with and allow you to pick up the scalable, learnable mindset lessons from the best in functional fitness. Today's show is all about entering the zone, a peak state you may or may not have experienced. If you have, this show will show you how to get back into it. If you haven't, this is a way to cultivate that experience. It applies both inside and outside of the training environment. First of all, an apology for the lack of podcasts recently. I needed to prioritize my athletes in the Inner Athlete Performance Camp and those attending my seminars, and as such, I'm afraid the podcast took a backseat. That being said, I have some great episodes lined up, including Carl Powley and Tony Blau. Also, I've had so much demand for another Inner Athlete Performance Camp this year that it's definitely going to go ahead. I'm taking applications right now, so if you're interested, head to mindsetrx.com/coaching and apply now if you're ready to master your inner athlete and take an enormous step towards your potential. If you'd like even more information, please don't hesitate to contact me on tom@alphamovement.co. Now, let's get back to today's show. The guest on today's show is author Clyde Brolin, who has created a fantastic book on entering the zone, or flow state if you call it that, called In the Zone. It's a great episode with a bunch of how-to applicable points. And here is Clyde. Clyde, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here, Tom. Thank you very much for having me on.
Good man. So let's start off with, as I just said, a very a more detailed introduction into yourself and also where the idea of In the Zone came from.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it goes back about 25 years, really. I mean, you can blame Ayrton Senna for all this because when I was a massive sports fan as a kid, and I got into Formula One particularly during my teen years, which happened to coincide with the years where Ayrton Senna was producing all his best stuff. And I was mesmerised by what he was able to do, but not just his performances on the track, but his ability to express what was going on in his head while he was doing it in an incredibly evocative and articulate way, which is actually quite unusual. So I mean, he just really grabbed me. And there were a couple of interviews in particular that caught my attention and really grabbed my interest, which was one classic one describing a lap he did around Monaco in 1988 when he was up against Alain Prost, multiple world champion, in the same car, and he was qualifying a second and a half quicker than him, which is unheard of really in Formula One. But he was doing it. But it actually took him a couple of years before he started revealing what was going on in his head while he was doing it. But he was effectively having this out-of-body experience and basically flying around this Monaco circuit to a point where he felt no longer in conscious control of what he was doing, and it was a sensation that ended up frightening him, and he ended up having to back off because he thought he was completely out of all limits of what he could handle, and he went back into the pits. But I mean, it obviously had a massive effect on him, and it certainly had a massive effect on me hearing about this incredible state of mind that he was able to get in. And so, I mean, I actually went on to write a lot about sport in the 90s and ended up in Formula One towards the end of the 90s and started chasing down. Unfortunately, I was too late to meet Ayrton himself, but I started chasing down all the other great Formula One stars that were still around, and just basically asking them and trying to get out of them if they'd had similar experiences, of this amazing sensation. And the more I asked, the more it became clear to me that pretty much everybody at this top level within that sport certainly had some version of this experience of being in this incredible state of mind where, I mean, obviously Senna was at an extreme level because he was at a very extreme level of ability anyway, but the sensation itself seemed to be quite universal. So I just kept I got addicted to grabbing these people and chasing them down and trying to get more and more accounts of this amazing sensation. And then I put all those together into a book, which I published years and years ago, called Overdrive, which was just about Formula One. And I thought that would get all this out of my out of the system, but it didn't. And I just wanted more and more and more. So that's when I expanded more into other sports. And the result of that is this latest effort, which is just generally called In the Zone, and it's about all sports and this amazing sensation. Yeah,
nice one. And it's worth saying that I fantastically enjoyed this book. It's really, really good. It really enjoyable read. So if you get nothing from this podcast, whoever's listened to it, just get the book. It's fantastic.
Thank you very much, Tom. I appreciate that.
That's all right. Do you mind going into how you define the zone as well? Because it's such a, I think, especially for the athletes who have never experienced it or may have only experienced glimmers of it, thinking about, was that it? Like, what actually makes the zone? So do you mind going into a bit more detail about what the zone is?
Sure. I mean, I think there are actually various levels of it, but I mean, in the general effect is, I mean, to a sports person, it's the ultimate nirvana, really. It's where they shine, and all thinking stops, all the conscious mind switches off to an extent, and it allows every last drop of all the years of training which have done to come flooding back out, and in this sort of amazing sense of I mean, we see from the outside, we see the results. We see, a perfect gymnastics routine, or a mazy run in football, a curling shot into the top corner, a snooker 147. Any of these things are really, these are all the sort of outside effects of a trip to the zone, and we see it from the outside, and we think, wow. But no matter how great we think it is, the actual sensation from inside seems to be at an even greater level, because it feels effortless. It can feel automatic, sometimes as if someone else is doing it. It doesn't even feel as though you're doing it yourself, and weird things start to happen. Time can slow down, space can feel like it's bending, and so this whole sensation, it can be actually quite unnerving, but the true legends of sport find the ability to get into this zone when it really matters. The heat is on, and the whole world is watching, like an Olympic final or whatever it is that's their big event that they've been training all these years for.
Cool. I really like the way you're saying switching off, but also incredibly focused at the same time. I think it seems to be this amazing tension between switching off and switching on, and as you said, kind of getting away from the unnecessary information and streaming that. Is that something you found to be true with the athletes?
Yeah, I think you've nailed it there. I mean, some of them report senses going into overdrive, the ones that matter to them. Hearing quite often shuts out, because I know that I've spoken to a few athletes. Edwin Moses, the old 400-meter hurdler, is a very good example. He during his Olympic final in 1984, he described how there were 80,000 fans cheering for him, but he couldn't hear any of them because he'd somehow managed to focus in his senses on he described actually hearing all the steps of his competitors over and above this incredible din that must have been around it. And so as they went over each hurdle, he said he could hear them jump, he could hear them land, and that lasted for about the first 8 hurdles of this race, and then after that it was sort of in the home straight, and then he said he switched out of it a bit, and then he just had to try and focus on getting home. But the incredible level of focus that these people reach when they're clearing out their mind, of everything that doesn't matter to them, weird things start to happen, and it is as you rightly say. So you're basically clearing out your conscious mind, so that everything that is crucial to whatever you're doing at the time gets heightened somehow, and the intensity of this focus is amazing.
Yes, I kept on. I don't know whether it's like because of the other reading I'm doing at the same time, but the parallels between meditation and being in the zone seemed like crazy. Like the fact of extreme concentration and emptying everything else. Did anyone ever use, or any of the athletes you interviewed, did they ever use meditation in a formal sense? I know visualization, which we'll come on to in a bit, played a big part in it. But did anyone use meditation?
Yeah, it was actually surprisingly common. I mean, I think it's becoming quite widespread in top level sport now that meditation is well known. I think a couple of NBA basketball teams used it in the 90s, and since then it's been quite a common thing. And a lot of the sports stars that I've met had in some way or other used meditation, maybe not necessarily in a formal sense, but I'll tell you who's a good example. Nico Rosberg, going back to Formula One, last year he won the world championship beating Lewis Hamilton, who's a real all-time great, and he beat him in the same machinery, and it was helped by the fact that he completely overhauled his mental approach last year, and he started working with a mind coach who really focused in on meditation, and he was doing meditation, he said, morning and night, basically every day throughout last year's season. It was something that was, I think, new to him. He'd already been working on his mind, but not specifically with meditation. So yeah, meditation seems to be one of these very effective processes. As you say, the actual result of a trip to the zone is a meditative thing in itself. It can be like sort of active meditation, but a lot of these people use specifically meditation to get there. That's definitely the case.
Nice. Do you know the name of the mindset coach you're talking about then?
Oh, no, sorry, for Nico Rosberg.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, actually, I don't. I'm sorry.
That's all right. No worries. It's something I can dig out. That's only just my own personal research. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
So you mentioned like levels of the zone. Can you go into a bit more about that?
Yeah. I mean, I think we all, even as amateur or pretty ineffective sports people, anybody who's done any kind of sport, or it's not just about sport either, by the way. It can be in lots of other fields, which we may, I'm sure, come back to. But say within sport, you know, if you're playing five-a-side football with your mates on every Thursday night, I'm sure there are days which you look back on and think, oh my God, that was incredible. Everything works, you know, every little touch you do, every shot you go pings into the top corner. Those, to me, that's exactly the same. It's the zone. And it is, this kicks in, you see, well, no matter what level we're at, and that's the thing. No matter what level we're at in a sport, whatever ability we have, as long as we can clear out this mind and just let it all flood out, even if we've only been playing, you know, for a year or something, or we're not experts compared to these, you know, people who've obviously spent decades honing their ability. We all have this ability to find our own natural game and just let it flood out. And I mean, and in fact, there's an extreme example, which if you go back to the phrase beginner's luck, it's something which we often hear in sport. And I mean, I remember once playing golf with. I don't even play. I hadn't played golf very seriously, but I remember thinking, okay, I'm playing against somebody who'd never played golf before, and I completely embarrassed myself because they came along and basically were wiping the floor with me. It got me thinking, oh my God, really? And it's a matter of expectations as well. If you come in thinking, oh, you know, I've got to do such and such, you put pressure on yourself. Whereas if you've never done something before, you can come in and just let fly with it. You can just use whatever is in your head, whatever you've from watching the TV. You've just seen something, and you just let fly with whatever skills have drifted into you. You don't care what the outcome is, and suddenly you can produce great stuff. And that's part of the key, also, to producing the best stuff at a higher level as well.
Nice. Do you mind talking a bit about visualization, how that seemed to play a role in it?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, visualization was something that came up time and time again. It seems to be a massive part of performance in sport and elsewhere as well. You know, I mean, I spent 7 years tracking down people for this, and so many of them. I mean, the whole process really hinges to me on visualization, because it's the original dream for me is the first step in visualization. All these great champions, they're great dreamers first. They dream big when they're kids or whatever. They dream, and they don't just settle for they don't just give up on it, or they don't just think, oh yeah, I'll do it, and then you go off and play on the PlayStation. They keep dreaming, and then they start dividing up the big dream into smaller little chunks of dreams, where they have to then, you know, say, okay, I'm going to get to this big dream via X amount of smaller chunks, and then they start dreaming those in greater detail. I spoke to Michael Phelps, the Olympian, about how, and in his teens, he was already visualizing exact split times on his on the swimming practice sessions that he was doing, and in his races as well. And he was soon hitting them precisely to the 100th of a second.
I found that incredible.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's the mark of somebody who is just completely focused on a vision in the future, if you like. And then as you know, often, you know, the greats are all doing this in some way or other. Steve Redgrave, before his last race in Sydney, when he was going for the 5th Olympic gold medal, he visualized that race every day for the 4 years leading up to it. I mean, and then the pressure ratchets up. I mean, Jessica Ennis-Hill, the face of the London Olympics. I mean, there can hardly be a bigger pressure than that. But she had visualised that event so often in her mind that, but by the time she walked into the stadium, she actually, with all these screaming fans desperate for her to win, she actually felt a strange sense of calm, because it was effectively just going through exactly what she'd been through thousands of times in her mind. And so it's a way of steering the future to our liking, really. And there are different levels of it. So as I say, there's those big dreams, but then also there are just before the event itself, a lot of them, visualization again is key. The night before, I spoke to many people who sat in their bed the night before and just went through every single aspect of what they were going to do the next day. The Olympic skier Franz Klammer is a brilliant example, because he used to lie on his bed the night before a ski downhill and go through it, and he'd shut his eyes and switch on a stopwatch and time himself doing this downhill from the next day. He'd get within tenths of the actual time that he was doing, because when they're so able to nail what they need, it's it's a skill, and it's a skill that people work at, but these sports people have to do it, because it's what they do is every an Olympian only gets once every 4 years to nail their entire life's work effectively, whereas so they have to focus on that moment. No other moment matters. The 10 minutes before it doesn't matter, 10 minutes after it doesn't matter. That is the moment they need to nail, and by thinking about it, they almost think it into submission. And visualization, honestly, it's a massive part of it. And actually, Tom, it's not just sight as well. It's if you bring in sound and and the other senses, touch, smell, anything. I mean, I know Novak Djokovic, when he first dreamt of winning Wimbledon, he didn't just picture lifting the trophy. He then pictured going and eating a bit of centre court grass afterwards. So he found a way of incorporating taste into his grand vision, and all these the coaches that I met seem to have this sort of it's the global thing. It's not just, it's called visualization, and I think some of them call it imagery, and it's just nailing the future to how you want it to be.
Yeah. So on that note, when I work with my athletes, I try to get them calling it imagination theatre, which sounds a bit more conceptual and a bit more esoteric. But it completely captures what I want them to get across, because it is that full sensory experience, isn't it?
Yeah, no, that's a really good way of doing it. Yeah, that's possibly a better term than the visualization.
Yeah, I'd like to say I invented it, but I definitely stole it from my mentors. But
but I mean, actually, and also it reminds me of another story, because one of the you can ratchet up the pressure to new levels, because I didn't just speak to Olympians in this, but I spoke to Felix Baumgartner. I don't even remember the guy who jumped out of the balloon. Amazing,
fascinated by him.
Yeah, he is, and he was visualizing that. He told me he visualized it 1,000 times in his mind, and every jump he'd ever done, because he didn't just do that jump. He was an expert skydiver, a wingsuit pilot, everything else, and every single one of these things he used to visualize it 1,000 times in his mind first, so that by the time he's up there, effectively doing something which no one's ever done before. So it's not like I don't say an Olympic event, maybe you know what's coming, you've done it 100 times yourself, whereas this is the first time he's ever done something, but he's visualized it in the mind so often that by the time he's up there, it just feels again like he's been there 1,000 times before. So it's he's just going through the motions in some ways, obviously not completely.
And did you find that emotion was a part of that imagination, that visualization, or did you find that a lot of athletes would remove the emotion from the equation?
Well, I think that the actual moment is about removing emotion. I think, it's an interesting one. I don't know, because I would say it's more about the pure sensation of being in the zone is probably generally an emotion-free one. And so if they can try to clear out emotion from their mind, I think that's probably the secret a little bit.
Nice. I think it's really interesting because initially we are driven to get to the zone by an emotional response that we want, whether it's significance or elation or something like that. Like that macro view that kind of, as you pointed to loads of times in the book, the dreaming of the future, that must be an emotional like reason to get there for whatever reason. It's not a purely like quantifiable or numerically driven response that we want. It's like an emotion, but then as we get closer, it's like putting the emotion to one side to get to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's very interesting to put. And actually, it's also, I mean, when I've been talking about the sort of subconscious taking over, it's also obviously the whole process of getting there is a conscious one, as you say. It's to actually chase after a dream. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. You're after fulfilling whatever it is that you're after, but it's also a conscious process every day to get up and to do the training that is inevitably required to get to start building the blocks on the way to any of these big achievements. And so that, it's the whole build up to it is in many ways a different process to what they then have to let it all go when they're actually out there. But yeah, no, that's a very interesting argument.
Were there any like congruent or like elements of the methodology that people used in visualization or imagination that were congruent throughout everyone's approach, and also on the far end of the spectrum as well? Was there anything that really stood out as unique?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. I mean, I suppose. I mean, I would say certainly. The general big dream is something that they all share, because you don't do anything extraordinary without aiming ludicrously high, and all these people have clearly at some point or other decided they wanted to do something extraordinary, and so the fact that they have dreamed big at all is something that's pretty much the same with all of them. I would say probably they're also, the vast majority of them are doing a sort of a refresher course just before they go out. If we go back to Formula One again, someone like Sebastian Vettel, before he goes out for a qualifying lap, he's sitting in his car with his eyes shut, going through the lap in his head, and he goes into detail about how he's focusing on every corner just as a final refresher just before he goes out. Just so that by the time he's out there, he's effectively letting it happen in accordance with this very clear vision that he's had. And I think I'd say someone like Nadia Comaneci would be quite similar as well. The great gymnast who was the first to do a perfect 10. She also described how she went into a quiet place within the arena itself. Once she was there, she made sure she found a quiet place so she could just think to herself and let everything that she would have to do in what was effectively only about 20 seconds of work, let it all come through. So yeah, I would say those two areas, probably the big dream and the final crucial bit of revision, are common to all of them. Okay,
and that final bit of like revision, as you phrased it, I've turned into Sean Connery for a second. As you phrased it, that final bit of revision, that's done in silence in the most part, or is there anyone that like kind of strays in that rule?
Well, I would say very few of them actually get the chance to do it in silence, because they're normally in a place where there's a huge amount of noise. I mean, Sebastian Vettel's in a Formula One garage surrounded by screaming engines and God knows what. Nadia Comaneci is in a gymnastics hall with music playing for all the other gymnasts, and all the people cheering and applauding and everything else around them. So they don't quite get that luxury. I would say that obviously that's another reason why a lot of them do also focus the night before on nailing this visualization, because that is a time when they can have silence and they can be completely by themselves and free to have that particular luxury. But it's, I mean, I'd say the intensity of focus, the amazing thing is that even despite all this whatever noise is around them, these great sports people are masters of the mind, and I think that's the thing that really comes out every time I meet them. You can tell that the very work that they do means that they have to be a master of the mind, and so they don't care about all this extra noise. Just as I was describing how Ed Moses blanked out completely the noise while he was actually doing it, I think these people have just intense focus, which they learn over the years. They don't necessarily come into the sport. In fact, I'm sure they don't come into the sport with this ability, but over the years of doing similar work and just gradually, honing their abilities, eventually they just become brilliant at it.
Yeah, I really like that. The fact that you mentioned it's an ability to grow. It's like that's the big takeaway from the book. I think that yes, these people have it, but they're not born with it. They did all the steps that led up to it.
Yeah, that is absolutely crucial. I mean, I think the as you say, the message that I'm trying to get across with this book is that everybody has this. It's just, I mean, obviously, most of us don't work in fields where we have to use it to our full ability. It's only at the extremes of something like sport, which just means that they absolutely have to, because they're up against the very, very best in their field every time they go out there. Whereas most of us probably don't have to be at this level, but at the same time, I'm sure we all have moments where we do have to find this level, and we all have crucial moments in our lives as well. It's we don't have an Olympic final, but we have the big job interview, we have exams, we have the first date. All these things are crucial to us, and by using these techniques, which sports people do, we can actually have a big impact on what we can all manage to achieve in these crucial moments in our lives, definitely.
Something that's just come into mind, and I don't know whether you've thought about this, is the comparison between, you hear about non-athletes being in a very, suddenly a life-threatening situation, and by their description of it, it almost sounds like they get into the zone. Time slows down, like you mentioned. They are intensely focused. They can hear things that are either very important, or it's almost come silent apart from a few things. Is that something you thought about before?
Absolutely. In fact, I mean, when I was doing my work on the first book, so if that was for Overdrive, I spoke to a number of people, just everyday people, as you say, who'd been in car crashes, because this whole, it's a classic report in things like that, of car crashes. We hear about time slowing down. We hear about people seeing the shards of glass of their windscreen just gradually, very slowly moving towards them. It feels like a sort of a fairy tale pace coming towards them, as opposed to the clear violence of what is actually happening. I spoke to a motorcycle rider who was involved in a crash where he was basically launched over the front of somebody who'd pulled out into the road in front of them, and he told me a story of what went through his mind during that particular incident, where he effectively he went through everything he'd ever learned about motorcycling, and he said, right, I've effectively, it was like going through an entire library of everything he'd ever read about motorcycling, everything he'd ever done in his life before. He went through it all, and then he said, and he went through it once, and he said, no, come on, I'm going to go through this all one more time. There's got to be something I've got to do. And then he had this vision of this one magazine article he'd read coming in front of him, and then one line sticking out of it, saying, okay, if you're ever going to be in a crash, stand up. And it just, that in that moment, he stood up just in time to then get launched over the front of this car. He landed 30 feet away or whatever, but he was still alive, and he was around to tell the tale. But the front of his motorcycle had got sort of scrunched on his car, and if he hadn't stood up, he wouldn't have been launched. He'd have been stuck in the middle of it, sort of thing. But this whole process that he went through, this amazing amount of detail, which I'd have to read again the book to find out what it all was. It all happened in 1 second, because they calculated. Then they went back and saw the mark of where he saw the car and where he hit it, and the speed he was going at. It was 1 second, and that we have this incredible ability in times of panic, or not panic. In fact, the opposite. We all have this if we can think clearly in those times. It doesn't necessarily mean that you can move any quicker. He was saying that he couldn't necessarily move his arms or legs any quicker, but the mind seems to have this amazing ability to whether it's adrenaline or whatever it is, it speeds up. And yeah, if we can access the full range of our ability in those moments, it's amazing. But of course, the experts in this, people like Formula One drivers and other racers who are used to crashing, they are even more used to sort of slipping into it. Whereas it would shock most of us in a completely unpredictable road crash or something like that. That they are used to it, even in crashes as well. They are used to the sort of sensation of what's going to happen, and so that they are then used and prepared to act accordingly. Whereas, so you can train it, you can train yourself up, but we all have it.
That's really interesting. You brought up that example of the motorcyclist. Like, just as a side note, I was cycling along in the middle of London the other day, and someone pulled out at me, went over the handlebars, and it was that exact slowing down that you mentioned there. I process everything. I do a bit of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as people here, and I pitched that roll. And I just rolled out it and finished like half kneeling, half standing. So it's amazing.
Wow!
Yeah, I know.
I wish I'd seen that.
I wish I was recording it. I wish I had a GoPro on. It was amazing. But yeah, it's fascinating how it just completely slows down and stops like that. It's amazing.
Yeah, I must say I don't think everybody necessarily gets it because we hear about the sort of the what is it, fight, flight, or freeze mode, and so some people. You can go into complete freeze mode. It's not like it's going to happen to everybody, but if you can somehow stay lucid in these moments, it's then things like that can happen. God, I wish I'd seen your I wish I had it on YouTube.
So do I. I've got all of the hits for that. Anyway, back on subject.
Sorry.
That's right. That's my bad. I think something that massively came. I put the method across, or the lesson across quite a lot, but it's so often lost, is the idea of just thousands and thousands of hours of practice and doing the basics right. And you go through it in a fair amount of detail about people going through like worst case scenarios. So can you touch on that? And I think Felix Baumgartner's example as well is fantastic.
Sorry, so you're talking about people visualizing the things that can go wrong?
Not necessarily visualizing stuff that can go wrong, and also just putting in the hours of going through the basics as well, like becoming very process driven.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that the whole idea behind this actually is that it's all about the process, no matter what you're doing, even if there's a massive target ahead. In fact, looking back, many of these great Olympic gold medalists and others look back later on, and it's the process that they treasure most and what they miss most, even if that involved, every day getting up at 5 a.m. and freezing cold, going off and, putting themselves through horrific, brutal regimes of constantly pushing the pain, obviously, that you need to go through every day to get yourself a little bit further. But I mean, it's for me, the whole process is critical, and it's really what achieve is all about. I mean, I divide the book up into conceive, believe, and achieve, and but for me, achieve is nothing to do with the actual final result. It's about actually having the enough within you to just keep going with the process of whatever your dream is, and to keep going with it relentlessly, because that's really where the rewards lie.
Was there anything that, because like, to be completely frank with you, this is a subject that I understand the importance of entirely, but I struggle to get across the lesson in as much like trusting the process and becoming process driven to the athletes that I work with, and in some situations. So is there anything that that you found that the athletes did on a regular basis that got them to enjoy the process, or to throw themselves in the process, or even just trust the process?
Well, yeah, I don't know about that. I mean, I know that the fact is that most of these people just love what they do anyway, which so whether they had to sort of force themselves into trying to enjoy the harder parts, I don't know. I mean, it was very much the whole idea is that no one is going to stick with something for for years or decades that they don't in some way enjoy. And very much, I mean, what came through with all these great people is just that, you know, they were just doing what they wanted to be doing, and that's really the only way. You can't force yourself to spend your life doing something which you just absolutely hate, which feels like torture to you, and you don't get anything out of it. And very much a common theme was that, yeah, they do naturally love it. I mean, I'm racking my brains if there were ways that they used to actually force themselves through it. The impression I got most of the time was that they were doing what they love, and, you know, the result. I mean, the thing about completing a dream, you know, even when it's a classic thing that when you do finally win the Olympic medal that you've been working towards for 20 years, very often it's a letdown, or it's not the great hurrah that you were expecting it to be. And the lesson that I got from that is that that this process thing is critical, because you then instantly have to find a new dream. There's no point once you finish your dream that unless you're going to disappear, just lie down for the rest of your life and go and swim about on a desert island. You've got to find another one, and that's a part of the problem we see often with athletes as well when they retire. We see that the difficulties that lie in sort of adapting to regular life, because part of the problem again is that the regular life doesn't always come in these neat packages of what precisely you're aiming for, which sport does bring.
That makes so much sense. I think also something again pops into my head whilst we're talking about that, or you're talking about that, is that I find the absolute best athletes, they love it. And it's interesting to see athletes who have done very well and they love the process, and then they suddenly had this expectation, they stopped enjoying it and stopped. There's so many in the world of CrossFit that I work in, so many athletes that then begin to loathe the process and they don't do as well again. I think a great example of this is Andre Agassi, if you've read his book Open.
Yes, I have. It's great.
So yeah, he kind of did that, didn't he? He was loving it until he got to that point and he had that pressure, and then he stopped enjoying the process, and then worked on it again.
But he's an extraordinary example, Andre Agassi. Yeah. I mean, reading that book, you just think, how on earth did he get that far? So, because I mean, he's basically the read I got from it. He basically was saying that he hated it pretty much constantly because he was brutalized into it by his father, and he just to get to the level that he did. To have hated it to the extreme levels that he did is incredible. I mean, I believe that since then he's sort of watered it down a little bit and said, in fact, no, I mean, I did actually obviously enjoy it as well to a certain extent. But I was honestly, the first time I read that, I was thinking, blimey, well, that pretty much disproves everything if you can get that far. Because the whole point about this book as well is that I was saying that we also as parents and everything else, it's not our position to enforce others to do whatever our dream is. It has to come from within, and that was very much with 99% of the sports people that I've dealt with. It's all very much come from within, even if maybe they were guided in one direction when they were young. They still, it didn't stop them from loving it and doing it. Whereas Agassi, oh my goodness, it's an incredible read. So yeah, I'm with him on that. But I do think he did deep down actually quite enjoy it. Yeah,
I think so, especially because he worked with Tony Robbins in the end, didn't he? And he ended up loving it again at the end, or for the first time at the end, maybe. Can you talk about self-belief? Because I think lots of people find it easy to visualize a dream goal, but there's no hope in hell that I'm going to get there.
Yeah, well, I mean, belief is a massive, massive part of the book, and it's a massive part of the process. Yeah, and it's, as you say, it is so easy, no matter what we're doing, to lose belief. You know, I spoke in the book about the inner voice that we all have that basically tries to stop us from doing anything unusual or hard, or things that are going to end up in massive disappointment. There are all these different expressions for it. One that kept coming up was this thing called the monkey mind, where basically it's like it's equivalent of a monkey swinging from tree to tree in the jungle. That was what Chinese Buddhists have called it, going back millennia. But this mind, we feed it, and it doesn't take much to feed it, and we feed it ourselves, and also everybody we meet when we branch out and try and do something different, we'll also feed it, because the initial reaction we'll get from people is generally not going to be a very encouraging one, or they'll look at you as if you're mad if you're going to try and do something a bit different. And all these ways are basically amplifying the negative voice in your head, thinking, oh my God, I'll never do this. And yet belief is so critical. I mean, I know, keeping with tennis, Novak Djokovic, I spoke to for the book, and he was saying how, because he was number 3 in the world for about 5 years behind, obviously, Nadal and Federer, the 2 greatest of pretty much ever. And he and then in about 2010 or 2011, he'd won 1 Grand Slam, the Australian Open in 2008. And then in about 2010, he started winning. And he said it was because he finally genuinely believed that he could win at this level. He'd basically been playing, and he'd been reaching the semi-finals for all these years, but it was when he sort of overhauled his mental approach and decided, yes, I can actually hang out with these people at these in the big finals, and I can win, and I believe I will win. And he had these, and there was some incredibly. The amazing thing about tennis over the past sort of 10 years is that there's just been 3 or 4 people at an almost impossibly high level at the same time, which is so rare in sport. We normally, when we get someone like that, they normally sort of shine way above the rest, whereas these 4 guys have been so extreme, at such a high level and reaching the zone time and time again. When you find 2 people in the zone at the same time battling against each other, honestly, that's why some of these finals have gone on and on and on. Djokovic played this nearly 6-hour Australian Open final against Nadal in I think 2011, and he was saying that he was a breakdown in the final set as well, but he was saying that he just kept honestly switching into his mind, saying, I can do this, I can do this, and if you can keep going with that belief against all evidence to the contrary, it's amazing what can happen.
Did you find self-talk had a big role in driving that belief? Or were there any phrases or perhaps feelings that a lot of athletes try to cultivate?
Yeah, I think self-talk actually is critical. There was, in fact, again, going back to young days, there was a couple of the, So again, I'm going to go given another example. Kathy Freeman, the great Australian athlete who was the sort of face of the Sydney Olympics in 2000. Her parents, she said, she was very fortunate to have her parents because they were very, very big believers in mental rehearsal and visualization, but they also made her, once she, because she was an Indigenous Australian athlete, so it was actually quite an unusual thing for a young Indigenous girl to go and chase after. But her parents got her to say over and over again, I am the world's greatest athlete, and saying it over and over again, even when she was young, and writing down very specifically what goals she had. And so this is a massive head start that she had mentally, because but by repeating this phrase, it prepared her for she then admitted, I was never the world's greatest athlete, and that wasn't really the point, but the whole aiming for the stars thing, and then and you get the results. The classic example in sport, I suppose, is Muhammad Ali with his "I am the greatest" talk, which he was using as sort of bluster to hype up the fight before his first world title fight against Sonny Liston. Sonny Liston was an incredible fighter, and frankly, Ali had no right or no knowledge that he was the greatest. But But by repeating it over and over to himself, almost like a mantra, it created an inevitable momentum in his mind that made the inevitable made the end result a lot more likely than if he hadn't been doing it.
Yeah.
And there's one other example. Then there was a Muslim athlete, Nawal El Mutawakkil, who was the first Muslim woman ever, or woman from a Muslim country ever to win an Olympic gold medal in 1984. And she also said that when she was growing up, her coaches kept saying, "You must say, I am number one. I am number one. I am the best. I am the best." And if you just keep repeating this to yourself, it's one way of bringing about. It just seems to have a steering effect.
Yeah. Like I think another example of that is the spectacle, love him or hate him, Conor McGregor. He's borderline mentally unwell, but that self-belief is incredible.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And I think there are limits, though. Clearly, he couldn't quite nail it in the boxing ring, but everything else is doable. I mean, and he's a great example again of somebody. Talk big. I mean, and there's another example in sport as well. There's a group example, which of course is the haka, which the New Zealand rugby team use, and it's that is a way of not just having this as an individual phenomenon. Of it's a sort of last minute, shouting, gelling together in this amazing atmosphere of the power it generates is quite incredible. And I spoke to a few of the New Zealand legends in this book, and they just it's no surprise to me that New Zealand are where they are in world rugby and where the dominant force, with this little extra final boost they get before every single match.
Oh yeah, and psychologically the effect it has on everyone else as well. This intimidation on top of that.
Yes, there is that element as well, definitely.
Can you talk a bit about how athletes have developed resilience and fortitude as well? Because like a big thing, I'm not sure how familiar you are with CrossFit, but it's essentially the sport of suffering. How much discomfort can you put yourself through? So I think that'd be a useful thing to touch on.
Yeah, I mean, again, that was a massive part of it. I mean, and I think that's a huge part. All these great sports people, it doesn't come easy for any of them. For a start, that they all live through defeat as pretty much a steady diet as they're growing up. It's the higher level you put yourself into, you're going to start getting thrashed by people, and then you just have to endure that and keep going. I mean, I also spoke to this amazing lady called Ros Savage in the book, who was a rower, or she quit her very high flying city job in her 30s to become an Atlantic rower. She said she wanted to go off and row single handed across the Atlantic, but she as she was crossing the Atlantic, she didn't associate with any of these words like courage or anything else that she was getting sort of sent on her. She had a blog going for a while, I think, and she was getting these things, "Oh, you're so courageous," and quite right. I mean, goodness me, it takes 100 days to row across the Atlantic, and 30-foot waves and everything else. It's pretty much unimaginable to most of us. But she says that resilience isn't something actually you have. It's not something you're born with, but it's something if you set out on any huge challenge, you actually develop resilience along the way. And it's a fluid concept that we can grow to put in our armory, just like all these other mental skills, and she along the way, she had to jump out, and she was terrified of getting out of her boat to scrape barnacles off her hull and all these other things. And I mean, but yeah, she just forced herself through it, and by the end she was writing, and she had this little whiteboard in front of her as she was rowing her million strokes or whatever it took to get across the Atlantic, and she started writing these things down, like courage, resilience, all these crucial words. And she sort of worked by the end of it. I can assure you she was pretty resilient.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah. I mean, there are other sources as well. We're just in general life, we all face difficulties, we all face challenges, and there are a few sportsmen who've suffered things like bullying when they were kids, and it seems to be the fast track to learning resilience. Ben Ainsley was one good example of somebody who apparently was bullied when he was young, and he, it's the sort of there's an element of get up and show you sort of thing, but also, I mean, it's not that I recommend this to anybody. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of people who could crumble under this, and it's obviously not something I'm taking lightly. But there are a few of them. Michael Phelps and Lewis Hamilton as well are both sports people who've apparently, suffered as they were young. And but talk about, giving yourself the grit that you need to take on any of these huge challenges. I mean, yeah, there are different ways to find it.
Yeah, I'll add my name of people, not to great sporting lists, but to people who think that bullying has helped them well into the future. I think it really taught me what hardship truly is, and what it takes to kind of not only push through negative hardship like that, but embrace positive hardship. It's quite interesting how it links into stoicism as well.
Oh yeah, no, that is very interesting. But I can also imagine that, I've focused here on, people who have made it through, but I can also imagine that there are people who wouldn't have found that resilience and an onslaught like that. So yeah, it is. I'm not saying in any way this is easy, but yeah, no. And you're not telling. Sorry, I was just going to say that there are even sort of bigger extremes of the challenges that some of these great sports people face. I mean, I was lucky to speak to quite a few great Paralympians who either are born with a big disability or have it inflicted on them at some point in their lives. Alex Zanardi is a good example of the latter. This racing driver who lost his legs in a crash and then has since sort of taken on almost even bigger legendary status as a paracyclist in the Paralympics. Just an amazing human being who just he now looks upon his losing his legs as one of the luckiest days of his life, pretty much. I mean, that's a slight wrong paraphrase of what he said, but it's because he said that the things that have happened to him since have been so incredible that it was just yeah. So the mind boggles, frankly, at what some people are able to come through and come out the other side smiling. And again, it's nothing I would ever want for myself or I want for anybody close to me, but it's at least a nice sort of. It's nice to imagine that the human spirit is capable of this kind of thing, even in the face of the worst things that life can throw at us.
No, man, that was perfectly said. Did you find that either the zone itself or the lead up to the zone differed from sport to sport?
Yeah. Well, let's think. Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, there are obviously. It's a different sensation, isn't it? I mean, I suppose we haven't really touched much on endurance sport, which I think probably a little bit. I mean, I think there's this. I spoke to the World Ironman champion, who's currently the World Ironman champion, a guy called Jan Frodeno, who's German, who was brought up in South Africa, and he was saying that, I mean, Ironman to me is frankly an unimaginable event. I don't even want to. Yeah, it's not happening. So, but he insists that everybody who's in obviously the World Ironman Championship is they've all got these amazing, obviously hugely physically fit, VO2 maxes. Everything is to the highest possible level. But he was saying that the difference again there at the very top level is mental, and how for him the challenge of doing an 8-hour Ironman is a mental one, and it's about keeping the concentration up for those 8 hours. He said no one except maybe the Dalai Lama can maintain their concentration for that length of time. It's just a physical impossibility. But yet he has to do it, and afterwards he says that he's mentally drained, not physically drained, which again makes me think, oh my god. But it's but he really does. He says he's hearing voices for like weeks after a big Ironman because of whatever he's put himself through mentally during that time. And I'm sure in your field as well, I'm sure the challenge in these sort of physical events. I mean, I've been talking quite a lot more about skill events, which are maybe slightly different, but in a physical event, what have you found about the mental? How much of it is going through the pain barrier is mental?
Like almost all of it. It entirely, from my point of view, like because CrossFit is the discipline of multidisciplines, so it can have anything. And what I found is that you can, like, I drew an arch here. I don't know whether you can see it, but like if you can imagine on one side of the arch, you have like a high power output per second, essentially. So you think about like Olympic weightlifting, a snatch or a shot put or something like that, and also very short events and high output, power output, and low skill, and all this other kind of stuff.
Yeah.
On the far end of the stuff, you have the very aerobic stuff, like for example, marathons and marathons probably best example of triathlons, long triathlons anyway, and the generally lower skill, more aerobic, different energy system, that kind of stuff. But I find that the further over to that arch, you essentially plot on that arch where the different aspects of the sport fit. So, example, like whether high output, high power output, or very aerobic, and you can plot it up, and it almost looks like a pressure point coming on the arch. And then I think the controllable aspects of self-talk and visualization and assertiveness is a big one. Like it depends on where you brace out about that arch. So like for a very low skill, very explosive exercise like a snatch, low skill, very like there aren't very many good examples of this at a very high level. If, like, for example, pushing a sledge or jumping as high as you can, that would be a more aggressive self-talk. That would be more like assertive. That would lead up to that perfect concentration. But on the right-hand side, or the far side, it'd be very much more like, it's almost like paternal on one side and maternal on the other.
Oh, right, yeah.
So, sorry, that was just me rambling.
No, it's
wasn't
good.
intentional.
I want to learn. This is fantastic. Yeah.
I'll send you the information on. Like, I've got tons of PDFs on that anyway.
Oh, great! Thanks so much.
That's
really
right. Like, can we talk about any resources that you use as well, aside from like, as well as the athletes themselves? Was there anything that really stood out to you as like seminal works coming up to this as well? Because I know a lot of it's fresh ground as well, which is why it's such an important book.
Yes, no. You've reminded me, because I was actually lucky, very towards right at the end of the process of it took me 7 years to hunt down all these athletes, but right at the end of it, pretty much just as the book was going to press, I spoke to obviously the great writer called Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who wrote the book Flow, which is a classic of this genre, and I was. It was like, it's like writing a book about relativity and speaking to Einstein, basically, because it's just so for me his works were crucial. I mean, it's going back now 25 years probably, or 20 years certainly, since I was first reading his stuff, and so it was fantastic to speak to him, and because I wanted to broaden this out specifically to general life, really, because this whole being in the zone is it's effectively flow, this flow state that he talks about, and how we can get in this flow state in anything, and it doesn't have to be necessarily a high skill thing. But I mean, we're supposed to be able to get in flow in washing up or any activity that we do in life. But he always found during his research is that the happy medium is that we are programmed, it seems, as humans to try and want to just edge ourselves out of our comfort zone and just push forward. I mean, he did this massive study with internet chess players, because he was a chess player growing up, and he said that the happiest that the internet chess players are is when they're playing somebody just 5% better than they are, so that if you win, it's amazing. If you don't, you don't worry about it. You're not expected to, but you can. It's just edging yourself forward and just edging yourself gradually up this scale of always wanting to improve a little bit and reach new heights. That seems to be key to this, and obviously it's an honor to speak to him. And the whole sensation of flow is something which we can aspire to in pretty much anything that we do.
Nice. And is there any final message that you'd like to put out to them?
Well, yeah. I mean, I suppose the whole point of the book really is just to say, I mean, these peaks of being in the zone are, when we see somebody who's an absolute world-beating expert doing their thing, it's an honor to watch, and it's an especial honor for me to have actually then. Every time I spoke to one of these people, I was practically pinching myself, really, because it's such a privilege to then peer into their mind. And I ask them, pretty intrusive, invasive questions a lot of the time. But the amazing thing is they are so happy to talk about this, because the message that they want to get across is that they see that having reached whatever their dream is or just done something amazing, they see that anybody is capable of it, because most of them are just normal people just growing up who just happen to then get some focus on what they wanted to do, which maybe evades most of us, but just by following that through and just keeping going with the process over however long it took, they all got to this point, and they can see, having done that, how anybody can manage this, no matter what your dream is, no matter what area of life. And again, I mean, we haven't really touched on other areas, but it can be music, it can be art, it can be science, it can be whatever it is that really floats your boat. But just by following through on these principles, which apply, particularly here to sport, but the visualization and everything else is something that can apply to anything in life. And so just by believing in your dream, going for the dream, and just enjoying the fact that you're going for a dream, for me, that is really basically pretty much what sums up what humans are all about. We are here to chase these, goals. We seem to have this ability, which maybe other animals don't, of seeing into the future and being able to picture something which we'd actually quite like to do. And so by chasing that down, it's amazing what we can achieve.
Nice. Well, Clyde, thank you so much for coming on the show. Please let everyone know where they can find In the Zone and where they can purchase it.
Oh, yeah. I have a website, ClydeBrolin.com, but you can obviously find In the Zone at Amazon and all these other places. It's been a labour of love. I hope that you love my labour.
Well, I certainly do, and that's no it's no hyperbole because you're on the show or anything like that. It's genuinely a fantastic book.
Oh, thank you very much, Tom. I really, really appreciate it. It's been great to talk to you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Mindset RX series of the Alpha Movement Podcast. Remember to check out the Inner Athlete Performance Camp at mindsetrx.squarespace.com, or actually, because I've got a new website now, mindsetrx.com/coaching, to hear more about how you can create the champ's mindset right now and learn to embrace hardship, crush consistency, and just be the best possible version of yourself, both inside and outside of the gym. And also a little teaser for you guys in North America, New Zealand, potentially Australia, potentially Dubai. World Tour is definitely going ahead, third quarter of 2018. If you're interested in either hosting or attending, shoot me an email and we'll sort something out, tom@alphamovement.co, and I'll hopefully see you guys in the rest of the world sometime soon.